Hello lovers, Eleanor here. Tonight we will embark on a journey into a quiet, often overlooked part of life. As I sit by my window, with the sun peeking through the trees, I can't help but think how strange it is, this stillness. You know, I've been living alone for the past 2 years, ever since my dear husband passed away. He was taken from us by this dreadful disease, COVID-19. I don't have to tell you how much I miss him. I know some of you have lost loved ones too. And perhaps just like me, you've felt the deep, quiet emptiness that comes with it. Isn't it strange? You wake up to the same morning, the same sunlight, the same air, yet it feels as though something vital is missing. For me, it's him. It's always him. He used to sit at the kitchen table, drinking his morning coffee, waiting for me to bring him his toast. Simple moments really, but those moments filled my heart with joy. How about you? Have you ever woken up and wondered how you could go on without that one person who made the world feel like it had meaning? I know I have. Now, each morning, I find comfort in my routines. I brew my tea, I read a bit of history, the same books we used to discuss so often. But there's no one here to ask me what I think about the stories, no one to laugh at my silly opinions. It's just the silence, and me. You know, I've found that one thing that helps fill the emptiness, even if only a little, is going to the supermarket. You may think it's just about buying food, and yes it is, but it's also more than that. It's my way of stepping out of this little bubble of mine, and re-engaging with the world. It might sound odd, but there's something comforting about walking through those aisles. In a way, it's like I'm reconnecting with the world, even if it's just for a brief moment. But I wasn't always like this. Before my husband passed, the trips to the supermarket were a shared experience. We'd pick out fruit, argue over which apples were the best, and laugh about things that didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Which ones do you want today, love? I'd ask. He'd always give that mischievous smile of his and say, "You'll see." It wasn't about the apples, it was about being together, about sharing those small, but significant moments. And now, when I walk through the same aisles, I can't help but feel that longing for him. So yes, I'm heading to the supermarket today, and as I step outside, I wonder if anyone else feels this way, if there's anyone else out there like me, just trying to fill the silence, to find something familiar, in a world that's been turned upside down. I stepped outside and the air hit me gently, the cool breeze of early spring wrapping around me like an old, familiar friend. The morning was calm, and the sunlight made everything look golden, like something out of one of those old photographs we used to keep in our albums. The trees, still bare from winter, were slowly beginning to bud, and the flowers, oh the flowers, were starting to peek out from the ground. It was as if nature itself was waking up, ready to take on another day. But for me, each step I took felt heavy, like I was trudging through memories I hadn't quite let go of. I looked around. Everything seemed so unchanged, so ordinary. The houses on either side of me were the same. The old bakery down the street still had its crooked sign hanging out front. I walked slowly, my pace unhurried, as if I were trying to savor the world around me, even if I couldn't quite feel a part of it anymore. As I made my way towards the supermarket, I passed by Mrs. Jenkins' house. She was out in her yard, pruning the bushes as she always did. I waved to her, and she smiled, her old hands waving back. She was a good soul, Mrs. Jenkins. She had been so kind to me after my husband passed. Sometimes when the loneliness feels unbearable, I stop by her house for a cup of tea. But even then, as much as I appreciate the company, I can't quite shake the feeling of missing that one person who truly understood me. I continued walking, thinking about how much the world around me had changed. How I had changed. When I was younger, I would have hurried past this very street without even thinking about the people or the houses. I had been so focused on my career, on my students, on everything except the simple moments in life. Now, as I move more slowly, I can't help but notice every little thing. The way the sunlight casts shadows on the sidewalk, the smell of the bakery on the corner, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. It's funny, isn't it? How time changes the way you see things. I never used to notice these things before. But now, with everything that's happened, I find myself paying attention to the little details. Maybe it's the quiet that allows me to hear these things. Or maybe it's just that, after losing someone so important, I'm trying to find meaning in the things I never thought twice about. As I reached the supermarket, I took a deep breath. The hum of the automatic doors opening felt almost like a greeting. The cool air inside the store hit me, and for a moment I felt like I was entering another world, a world full of movement and life. I stepped inside, unsure of what to expect, whether it would feel like the same old place, or if it would feel even emptier than it did before. I walked down the aisles, running my hand along the rows of shelves, and everything seemed so familiar, yet so distant. The packaged foods, the bright labels, they looked the same, but somehow they felt different. The world felt different. I wondered, how many people in the store are going through what I am? How many others are just walking through their days, trying to make sense of the noise around them while their hearts are full of silence? I suppose, in a way, the supermarket is life itself. Everything is so ordinary, so mundane. Yet when you stop to really look, you realize how much each small detail means. And for some of us, it's the only place where we feel like we're still part of the world. Word waiting, continue. The bright fluorescent lights of the supermarket greeted me as I walked through the automatic doors. The smell of freshly baked bread lingered in the air, a comforting familiar scent that always made me feel a little bit more at home. The hustle and bustle of the store surrounded me, but it felt different now, harsher, less welcoming than before. There was a certain coldness to it, even with the warm smells of baked goods and the vibrant colors of the produce. I suppose it was because I wasn't here with him, wasn't sharing in those small happy moments that used to make these trips feel like an adventure. I moved slowly through the aisles, my eyes gliding over the items on the shelves without really registering them. Tomatoes, apples, bread, milk. It was all so routine. I could hear the soft hum of the shopping carts, the shuffle of feet on the polished floors, the distant murmur of conversation. Everything was happening around me, but I felt somewhat detached from it all. It's funny, isn't it? How even in a crowd, you can feel so alone. A familiar voice broke my reverie. "Eleanor, is that you?" I turned toward the voice, and there stood Mrs. Thompson, an old friend from my teaching days. She had always been one of the brightest, most cheerful people I knew. Her laugh was infectious, and her love for life was contagious. But today, she seemed different. Her eyes were tired, and there was a weariness in her posture that I hadn't noticed before. "Well, look at you," I said, smiling as I walked over. "How long has it been since we've seen each other?" She gave a small, tired smile. "A little too long, I think. How have you been, Eleanor?" I paused, unsure of how to answer. How could I explain the emptiness I had felt in these 2 years, the slow march of time that had felt like it was dragging me along? How could I explain how it felt to live in a world without my husband? I settled on something simple. "I've been keeping busy," I said, offering her a smile. "You know, the usual. Tea, books, the occasional trip to the supermarket." I gestured around. "And you? How's life treating you?" She sighed, a deep, weary sound that resonated in my bones. "It's been hard, Eleanor. You know, since the pandemic, everything has just changed. I lost my job, my savings dwindled, and it feels like every day is a struggle just to keep up. I don't know how much longer I can keep going like this." I felt a pang of sympathy for her. The world had changed so much, and not all for the better. But then, that's the nature of life, isn't it? We have our highs, our lows, and everything in between. The pandemic had taken so much from so many of us. Jobs, security, peace of mind. Everything felt like it had been turned upside down. But the real challenge wasn't just surviving. It was finding a way to hold on to hope in the face of it all. Life can be so unforgiving, can it? I said softly, my voice a mix of sadness and understanding. "But you know, we've been through tough times before. Think about the Great Depression, how people were forced to make do with so little, and yet they still found a way to pull through." Mrs. Thompson looked at me, her eyes searching mine as though trying to find the meaning in my words. "Do you really think we'll make it through all this?" she asked quietly. "I mean, how can we? Everything's changed. People are struggling more than ever." I thought about it for a moment, considering her question. The weight of it sat heavy on my heart, but I could feel the words coming to me. Words I had often shared with my students during my teaching days. "I do think we'll make it through. I said, my voice firm but warm. But it's not going to be easy. And it's not going to happen overnight. You know, during the Great Depression, people found ways to survive not just by working hard, but by sticking together. Families, communities, they banded together, shared what they had, helped each other when times were tough. That's what we need now. Community, empathy, and the willingness to look out for each other. Mrs. Thompson nodded slowly, as if taking in my words. You're right, she said, though her voice was tinged with doubt. It's just so hard, Eleanor. I feel like I've been trying everything, but it's never enough. I placed a hand gently on her arm. It's not about doing it all on your own, I said. We're all in this together, and sometimes all we can do is take it one day at a time. But remember, you don't have to go through this alone. We shared a quiet moment, standing there in the bustling aisles of the supermarket. Two old friends reconnecting over the struggles of life. It felt comforting to be able to share this space with her. To know that even in a world that sometimes felt too big and too indifferent, we could still offer each other a bit of light. Awaiting. After parting ways with Mrs. Thompson, I slowly made my way through the aisles. The store was busier now, and the noise of the shoppers, the clattering of carts, the distant chatter of families deciding which brand of cereal to buy, felt like a blur around me. I moved through the store almost on autopilot, picking up a few items here and there, but my mind kept returning to the conversation I had just had. I thought about how we as a society had come to this point, where so many were struggling to make ends meet. We've all heard the stories of people losing jobs, of businesses going under, of families who just can't seem to catch a break. The pandemic had made it all so much worse, turning what was already a difficult world into something unrecognizable. I couldn't help but wonder, how did we get here? Looking at the shelves around me, I was struck by the price tags. A loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, nothing extravagant, but the price was higher than it used to be. And I couldn't help but notice the difference between the higher-end products, the organic items, and the budget-friendly ones. There was a disparity, a clear divide between the haves and the have-nots. And it seemed so stark, so visible in these small everyday purchases. Do you remember, I asked myself quietly, when it wasn't like this? When food didn't feel like something you had to plan and budget for weeks in advance? I couldn't help but think back to the Great Depression, when families across the world were forced to get creative in order to survive. People lost their jobs, homes, and livelihoods, and yet they somehow managed to survive, banding together, relying on each other to make it through. There was a kind of resilience in those communities, a deep sense of solidarity that I wondered if we had lost today. I remembered hearing stories from my grandparents, who had lived through that time. They would talk about how families would gather together in the evenings to share meals, even if it meant stretching what little food they had. They would grow their own vegetables, trade goods with neighbors, and offer help to those who needed it the most. The times were difficult, yes, but the sense of unity and care for one another was stronger than any of the hardships they faced. Maybe we can learn from that, I thought, glancing down at the food in my cart. It wasn't much, just the basics, a few vegetables, some bread and milk. But it was a reminder. A reminder that no matter how hard things get, we have to remember that we're all in this together. Whether we're rich or poor, healthy or sick, we still share this world. And it's up to us to decide how we move forward. As I continued down the aisles, I could feel a sense of sadness settling in. The disparities in the prices of food, the divisions in our society, the struggles that so many people face, everything felt so overwhelming. But then I stopped, took a breath, and reminded myself. History is filled with examples of people who overcame impossible odds. From the Great Depression to the civil rights movements to the recovery after the wars, it's clear that when people come together, there is little they can't achieve. I picked up a carton of eggs, a bag of flour, and a bunch of carrots, and moved toward the checkout counter, feeling the weight of everything on my shoulders, but also a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, if we could remember what it was like to care for one another, to put community before profit, we could make this world a little better. Word count 1238 awaiting. As I approached the checkout, my eyes fell on a young woman who was struggling with her toddler while holding an infant in her arms. The baby was crying, and the toddler was tugging at her skirt, clearly frustrated. She was trying to balance the baby in one arm, and with the other, she fumbled through her purse, searching for her wallet. Her face was a mixture of exhaustion and determination, as if she was fighting an invisible battle that no one could see. I couldn't help but stop and watch for a moment. How many times had I seen this scene played out in my life? Mothers, fathers, people carrying burdens that the world never seemed to acknowledge. I approached her gently, offering her a small smile. "Do you need a hand?" I asked softly, my voice warm but not intrusive. She looked up at me, her eyes tired but grateful. "Oh, thank you. I'm just trying to get these two sorted. It's never easy with little ones, especially when I'm doing it alone." I nodded, knowing that feeling all too well. "I can imagine," I said, my thoughts immediately turning to the times when I was raising children, running between work and home, never quite able to catch up with the demands of life. But at least I had the support of my husband, and I didn't take that for granted. Not for 1 second. She hesitated for a moment, glancing down at the crying baby, and then gave a small weary smile. "It's just, I've been trying so hard to make everything work, but sometimes it feels like it's all too much. I'm a single mom, and with everything that's going on in the world it feels like I'm sinking." I felt a deep pang of sympathy for her. It was one thing to feel isolated, but it was another entirely to be doing it alone, without the support that so many of us rely on. I thought of my own losses, how it had been so difficult to navigate the world without my husband. And I couldn't imagine what it must be like to be in her shoes, without the safety net of a partner. "You're doing the best you can," I said softly, putting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You know, when I was younger, I often looked at others and thought they had it all together. But when you really get to know someone, you realize that we're all just trying to make it through each day. And you, my dear, are doing a wonderful job." She looked at me with a mixture of surprise and gratitude, as if she hadn't expected anyone to see her struggle and acknowledge it. "Thank you. That means a lot," she said, her voice catching in her throat. "It feels like no one understands, you know." I nodded. "I do know," I said gently. "And sometimes, the most important thing is just to know you're not alone, even when it feels like you are." She smiled, and for a moment I saw a flicker of relief in her eyes. It was the kind of smile you give when someone has reminded you of something you've forgotten. That you are seen, that you are enough, even in the midst of your struggles. As I turned to grab my cart and move toward the checkout, I felt a tug at my sleeve. It was her, holding out a small packet of crackers. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice trembling a little. "I don't have much to offer, but I thought maybe these might help." I smiled, touched by the gesture. "You don't have to thank me, but I'll take them," I said, as a reminder that kindness is always there, even in the smallest ways. We exchanged one last smile before she turned to finish checking out. I couldn't help but watch her for a moment longer. There was something about her, about the way she kept going despite the weight she carried, that reminded me of the resilience of people throughout history. The same resilience I had seen in stories of survival, of hardship, and of communities pulling together in times of need. And suddenly, it hit me. The very thing I'd been thinking about earlier. The world was struggling, yes, but it was also full of people who, just like this young woman, were doing their best to keep moving forward. It was these moments, these small acts of kindness, that made a difference. In the face of hardship, it was the human spirit, the desire to care for one another, that would ultimately carry us through. I pushed my cart forward, my heart just a little lighter than it had been when I entered the store, giving back. As I walked toward the checkout counter, the weight of the day seemed to settle into my bones. The exchange with the young mother lingered in my thoughts. I could still hear her voice, the tremble of uncertainty mixed with gratitude. Life was hard, and sometimes, just a simple act of kindness was the lifeline someone needed to keep going. I remembered the days when I had been that young mother, full of hope, yet overwhelmed by the weight of the world. The self-checkout lanes beeped in the background as I approached my turn. But before I could place my items on the conveyor belt, I noticed something. The young mother, now almost finished with her own checkout, was standing at the end of the line, looking over at the shelf. She caught my eye and quickly looked away, perhaps feeling embarrassed. But there was something in her expression that made me stop in my tracks. I noticed the sadness still lingering there, the exhaustion, the overwhelming sense of responsibility. Then it struck me. What if I could help her in a way that would make a real difference? Not just by offering kind words, but by doing something tangible, something that might ease her burden, even if only a little. "Excuse me," I said to the cashier who had just scanned the last of my groceries. "I'd like to buy an extra pack of diapers and some baby food. I'd like to give them to that young mother over there, the one with the baby." The cashier looked at me in surprise, but smiled warmly. "Of course, that's very kind of you." I turned toward the young mother, who was still standing at the shelf, her eyes scanning the baby products. She hadn't noticed me approach. As I walked over to her, I could see the exhaustion in her shoulders, the way her hands shook ever so slightly as she reached for a box of diapers. I cleared my throat, hoping to catch her attention without startling her. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I couldn't help but notice that you're doing a wonderful job, even though I know it's not easy. I've been there myself, and I just wanted to offer a little something to help." She turned to face me, looking at me in confusion at first, and then slowly, her face softened as she realized what I was offering. I handed her the pack of diapers and baby food. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She took the items in her hands, but I could see the shock in her eyes. I smiled gently. "You don't have to worry about paying for them. Consider it a small gesture, something to help you through the day," I said, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. Her eyes filled with tears and she quickly wiped them away, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Thank you. You have no idea how much this means." I could feel the weight of those words, the gratitude, the relief, wash over me. The simple act of giving, of sharing, was the one thing that made everything feel just a little less heavy. We weren't alone in this world. Not really. We were all connected, bound by the human experience, by the need to care for each other. I patted her on the shoulder and gave her a reassuring smile. "Take care of yourself, okay? And know that people see you, and people care." As I walked away, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle into my bones. It wasn't much. A few simple groceries, some baby food. But to her, it might have meant the world. To me, it was a reminder of the power of compassion. The same kind of compassion that had gotten so many through difficult times in history. From the darkest moments of the past to the struggles of the present, compassion had always been the light that led us forward. I pushed my cart toward the checkout, and for a brief moment, I felt connected not just to the world around me, but to a much larger truth. We all had a part to play, no matter how small it seemed. And maybe that's what mattered most. As I walked out of the supermarket, the evening sun was already beginning to set, casting a soft, golden light over the street. The bags in my hand felt heavier than they had earlier, not because of the groceries, but because of the emotions they had stirred in me. Giving, even in small amounts, always seemed to remind me of the ways we used to connect with each other in simpler times. It was a quiet reminder that, despite everything we may lose, we can still find ways to lift each other up. I took a deep breath, the cool air filling my lungs, and walked slowly toward home. The path was familiar, the houses along the way still looked the same, but for some reason, everything felt different today. Perhaps it was the interactions, the brief but meaningful exchanges, that had touched something deep within me. I hadn't felt this connected to the world in a long time. It made me wonder how many others were out there, struggling in silence, just waiting for a moment of kindness. And then as I walked, my thoughts began to wander, as they often do. I found myself thinking back to the Great Depression. How it wasn't just an economic collapse, but a societal one. People lost their jobs, their homes, their security. And yet, despite everything, people found ways to support each other. Communities came together, families leaned on one another, and neighbors helped neighbors in ways that seemed impossible, considering the dire circumstances. I've read so many stories about how people managed to find hope in the darkest of times. They didn't have much, but they shared what they had. As I passed by the small houses on my street, I couldn't help but think that there was a lesson to be learned here. We weren't in the midst of a Great Depression, not exactly. But in many ways, the pandemic had forced many of us into our own personal struggles. We lost loved ones, jobs, security. We still don't know what the future holds. But I saw something today, something I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the food I had shared, or the kindness exchanged with a stranger. It was the reminder that even in the midst of hardship, there is still a sense of community, a desire to help one another. I remembered something my mother had often said when I was a little girl: no matter how hard life gets, Eleanor, never forget that the most important thing we have is each other. At the time, I hadn't fully understood what she meant, but now, with so much distance between those words and the life I had lived, I saw the truth in them more clearly than ever. We often look to history for answers, as if the past can offer us some sort of roadmap for the present. And maybe it can. But perhaps what history teaches us most is this: that even in the worst of times, there are those who rise up, who refuse to let the world crush them. They reach out, they give what they can, and they pull others up with them. I walked a little further, the weight of the groceries in my hands still heavy, but now accompanied by a deeper sense of gratitude. The world may have changed in ways we couldn't have anticipated, but the essence of what makes us human, the way we care for one another, hasn't changed. It's still there, waiting to be rediscovered, waiting for us to reach out and embrace it. When I reached my door, I paused for a moment, my hand on the knob. I turned, looking back at the quiet street, the shadows lengthening with the evening. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps there was more to this journey than just surviving. Maybe, just maybe, it was about finding those moments of connection, those quiet acts of kindness that reminded us that we were not alone in this world. Coming back to the home, a place of solitude. I opened the door slowly, the familiar creak of the hinges echoing in the quiet hallway. It was a small sound, but it brought a sense of comfort. The house was still as it had always been, warm, with the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the background, the soft tick of the old clock on the wall. It was the kind of house that had always felt alive with the presence of my husband, full of laughter, stories, and the comfort of knowing someone was always there. But now, the silence enveloped me as soon as I stepped inside. It wasn't an oppressive silence, but a quiet that spoke of absence. I placed the bags on the kitchen counter and began unpacking, my hands moving on their own accord. I didn't need to think about it. This had become another routine, something I had done 1,000 times before. Yet, each action felt more deliberate now, each step reminding me that I was here alone. That the world I had once shared with someone was now reduced to memories and the occasional visit from friends or neighbors. I glanced over at the small chair by the kitchen table. It used to be where he sat, reading his newspaper, sipping his coffee, and occasionally making little jokes to me about the articles he'd read. Now, it was empty. I had to admit that I was still getting used to the emptiness. No matter how much time passed, it still felt like the space beside me should be filled with his presence. I made myself a cup of tea, the same way we always did. The kettle whistled softly, and I poured the hot water into the teapot. As I waited for it to steep, my thoughts wandered back to the supermarket. I thought about the people I had met, the young mother, the brief conversations with Mrs. Thompson, the way the cashier had smiled at me when I had offered help. There was something so simple yet so profound in those moments. It was a reminder of how, even in the midst of our busy, often isolating lives, we still had the ability to reach out, to show kindness, to connect with others. Maybe that's what it is, I said aloud, the sound of my voice filling the space. Maybe it's about connection. I realized then that the loneliness I felt wasn't just about missing my husband. It was about the absence of those connections, those small moments that made life feel meaningful. The moments when you share a glance, a word, a smile with another person, and in that instant, you're reminded that you're not alone in the world. I sat down at the kitchen table, the steam from my tea curling in the air in front of me. I thought about the community I had seen today, the way we all reached out to each other, even in the smallest ways. It was a reminder that, even though we might be physically alone, we were never truly isolated. The people we meet, the lives we touch, are all part of this great web that ties us together. I leaned back in my chair, the warmth of the tea filling me, and I let my thoughts settle. Maybe it wasn't about waiting for life to get back to normal. Maybe it was about finding new ways to connect, to offer compassion, to make sure that even in the silence, there was still a quiet hum of life, a hum that would keep us moving forward, one small moment at a time. As I sipped my tea, I couldn't help but smile. The world may be changing and life may not look like it used to, but in the end, it was the small acts of kindness, the quiet moments of connection, that made everything worthwhile. As I sat there, quietly sipping my tea, the world outside continued on, moving at its usual pace. The sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room. The evening was settling in, but my mind was still wandering, bouncing between the present and the past. And as often happens, I found myself thinking about history. History was my life, my passion. For years, I stood in front of classrooms, sharing stories from the past with my students. I would tell them about the courage of those who lived through wars, the resilience of families who struggled through the hardest of times, and the strength of communities that came together to survive. The more I taught, the more I realized that history wasn't just something in books. It was alive, breathing, and it had so much to teach us, even today. So as I sat here in my little house, thinking about my own loneliness, I began to draw parallels with the past. I thought back to the Great Depression, how entire families had lost everything. Businesses shut down, banks failed, and people were left without work. But amidst the chaos, there were also stories of hope, of how people didn't give up, even when it seemed like everything was falling apart. Communities banded together, shared what little they had, and rebuilt from the ground up. I can't help but think that there's a lesson in that for all of us. During the Depression, people survived, not only by being strong, but by being kind, by being there for one another. They understood that they were all in this together, that the struggle was something they shared. And that, I think, is something we've forgotten. I don't mean to say that we haven't tried, but somehow in the hustle and bustle of modern life, we've lost sight of the most important lesson of all, the importance of connection. The world has changed, yes, but people haven't. At our core, we are still the same as those who lived through the Great Depression, still the same as those who fought in the wars, still the same as the people who shared bread with their neighbors in times of hardship. We still have the capacity for empathy, for love, for care. It's just that, somewhere along the way, we've let those things slip away. But even now, I see glimpses of it. When I offered that young mother the diapers and baby food, I saw a little spark of what the past had taught us. It wasn't about the items I handed her. It was about the connection, the understanding that in this world, we don't have to struggle alone. I can still remember my grandfather telling me stories about his time during the Depression. He would speak of neighbors sharing food, of families taking in others when they had nothing to give. The hardest times bring out the best in us, he'd say, a faraway look in his eyes. I didn't fully understand what he meant when I was young, but now, I think I do. So here I am, sitting alone in my home, reflecting on those lessons. The past is never really gone. It's here, in every small act of kindness, in every moment when we reach out to another person. And maybe, just maybe, we need to look to those who lived before us to find the strength to face today's challenges. Word count. The evening deepened around me, the soft hum of the house growing louder in the quiet, as if the walls themselves were speaking, filling the silence with their presence. I sat back in my chair, the cup of tea now nearly empty, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace settle within me. It was a quiet peace, born of the small moments I had experienced today, the simple acts of kindness, the brief but meaningful encounters with others. As I sat there, I found myself thinking about the world we live in today. It's not perfect, far from it. We still struggle with inequality, with isolation, with the ever-looming uncertainty of what tomorrow will bring. But in the midst of all that, there is something we still have that no amount of time, no crisis can take away. Our ability to care for one another, to see each other, truly see each other, in the midst of the chaos. To reach out, even in the smallest ways, and offer support, a kind word, a moment of understanding. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that we can't wait for the world to change on its own. We have to be the ones to change it, even if it's in small, everyday ways. The world may not always be kind, but we can be. The world may not always offer hope, but we can create it. And the world may often leave us feeling isolated, but we can choose to connect, to see each other, and to lift each other up. I'm not a young woman anymore. The years have worn their marks on me, and the pain of losing my husband is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. But that doesn't mean I have to let that pain define me. And it certainly doesn't mean I have to withdraw from the world. As I reflected on the lessons of history, on the resilience of people who lived through their own struggles, who faced adversity and came out stronger, I realized that we are all capable of that same strength. We have the capacity to rise above, to make a difference, no matter how small the act may seem. So my dear listeners, I want to leave you with this. If you ever find yourself feeling lost, if you ever find yourself questioning how we can make it through these trying times, I urge you to look around. There are people all around you who need your kindness, your understanding, your compassion. And you don't have to do it alone. Remember the lessons of the past, how communities once came together to help each other, to share what little they had. That spirit still exists, and it starts with you. It starts with me. If you enjoy these journeys through time, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can learn from the past, and we can make the future a little brighter. Thank you for listening, my dear ones. Let's continue to make this world better, one small act of kindness at a time.